I want to tell you about the word that defined my childhood. Mistake. Not screamed, not delivered in a moment of anger that could later be walked back or explained away. Said quietly, casually, in conversation. The way you say something so embedded in your understanding of the world that you no longer hear yourself saying it. Emily was not exactly planned. Emily arrived at a complicated time. Emily has always been a lot. These were the versions my mother used in polite company. In less polite moments, and there were less polite moments, she was more direct. You were a mistake. I love you, but you were a mistake. She said it the first time when I was 9 years old. I remember the kitchen, the afternoon light, the specific quality of the silence that followed. I remember deciding very carefully how to carry it. Margaret Reyes was not a simple woman. She had married young, had my brother Thomas at 22, had me at 29, 7 years later, after the marriage had settled into something comfortable and the financial pressure had eased, and there was, by any reasonable measure, room for another child. But my mother's sense of her own life had also settled by then. Her identity, her routines, the specific architecture of her days. And I had arrived, loudly, demandingly, needily, and disrupted every single piece of it. She had never quite forgiven me for that, as if I had chosen it, as if a 9-day-old baby selects her timing. I grew up in the shadow of that word. Not dramatically, not with the obvious markers of an unhappy childhood. There was food and shelter and school and holidays and all the visible evidence of a family that was functioning. But underneath all of it, running like a current beneath the surface of everything, was the knowledge that I had not been wanted in the way my brother had been wanted. Thomas was planned. Thomas was celebrated. Thomas was the child my mother had chosen. I was the child who had arrived anyway. And in the specific mathematics of my mother's love, which was real, I never doubted that it was real, I was always slightly less. Always slightly less. I had built my entire life around compensating for that arithmetic. Better grades, more achievements, the kind of relentless self-sufficiency that develops in children who learn early that needing things comes with a cost. And I had never, not once in 30 years, told anyone what she said to me in that kitchen when I was 9 years old, until the night everything changed. The dinner was my parents' 40th anniversary. The whole family gathered. Aunts, uncles, cousins, Thomas and his wife, my father's sister who had driven 4 hours, and my mother's college friend who had flown in from Phoenix. 40 years. I had helped organize it. Of course I had. I organized everything in this family. The gatherings, the logistics, the remembering and coordinating and following through that kept us all connected. I did it without acknowledgment because acknowledgment was not something I had been taught to expect. The evening was warm and full, and everyone was happy in the easy way people are happy at events that celebrate longevity and love. My mother was radiant. She moved through the room with the specific grace of a woman in her element, receiving congratulations, laughing at memories, holding my father's hand with the practiced ease of 40 years. I watched her and felt the complicated thing I always felt: love, admiration, the persistent ache of something unresolved. And then my cousin Maria, 24, enthusiastic, completely unaware of the specific minds she was walking through, stood up with her wine glass and said, "I want to say something about Aunt Margaret, because I think she's the most remarkable woman I know. She built this family, she kept everyone together, and she did it while raising 2 incredible children who are nothing alike and both completely wonderful." Everyone smiled. I smiled. Thomas, Maria continued, was obviously always going to be amazing, but Emily? She paused for effect. Emily was the surprise that made this family complete, and I just think that's beautiful. The room applauded. My mother's smile did not change, but something in her eyes did, and my father, who had been sitting beside her, who had been smiling the relaxed smile of a man enjoying his own anniversary, went very still. I noticed. I always noticed. My father found me in the kitchen an hour later. He was carrying his wine glass and wearing the expression of a man who has been deciding something for a long time and has finally made a choice. "Emily," he said, "can I tell you something?" "Of course," I said. He set his glass down, and then my father, a quiet man, a gentle man, a man who had spent 40 years loving my mother in the specific, accommodating way of someone who understands that the person they love contain complications they have chosen to accept, told me the truth. Not a small truth, the truth, the one that explained everything, the one that my mother had apparently never intended for me to know. I was not unplanned. I was not an accident. I was not a mistake. My father had wanted a second child desperately, had asked for years, had been told repeatedly by my mother that she was not ready, that the timing wasn't right, that Thomas was enough. And then, after 7 years of asking, she had agreed. I had been my father's child from the beginning, wanted, planned by him, and my mother, who had agreed reluctantly, who had felt her settled life disrupted in ways she had not fully anticipated, had spent 30 years redirecting that resentment onto me. Mistake had been her word for a choice she had made and regretted, not a description of me, a confession about herself. I stood in my parents' kitchen at their 40th anniversary party and felt 30 years shift. Not disappear, shift. The word was still real. She had still said it, 9 years old in an afternoon kitchen. That had still happened and would always have happened, but the meaning of it changed. Mistake had never been about me. It had been about her. Her reluctance, her ambivalence, her resentment at a decision she had made freely and then blamed on the child who arrived as a result. I had spent 30 years carrying something that was never mine to carry. I went back to the dining room. I found my mother at the center of a conversation with 3 of her oldest friends, laughing, warm, the performance of a woman who had nothing on her conscience because she had long ago reclassified conscience as someone else's problem. I waited until the conversation paused. "Mom," I said, "can I speak with you for a moment?" She excused herself graciously. We found a quiet corner of the room, not private enough for a full confrontation, not public enough for an audience, the perfect middle ground. Intentional on my part. "Dad told me," I said. A pause. Her expression did not change immediately. The specific composure of a woman who has maintained a version of events for 30 years and has learned to hold it under pressure. "Told you what?" she said. "That I wasn't an accident," I said. "That he asked for 7 years. That you agreed. That I was wanted. By him. From the beginning." She looked at her wine glass. "That's his version," she said. "Is it incorrect?" A longer pause. "It's complicated," she said. "It isn't," I said. "You called me a mistake for 30 years, and I wasn't one. I was a choice you made and resented, and I need you to understand what that cost." My aunt appeared at my mother's shoulder, then my father, then Thomas, who had clearly been watching from across the room and had decided that whatever was happening required his presence. My mother looked at the faces around her, and I watched her understand, for the first time, I believed, that the version she had maintained for 30 years had an audience she had never accounted for. "Emily," Thomas said quietly, "what's happening?" I looked at my brother. "Ask Mom. She has something she should have told both of us a long time ago." My mother told the truth. Not all of it, some things she still couldn't fully name, but enough. She told Thomas that I had not been unplanned, that my father had wanted a second child and she had agreed reluctantly, and that she had, her word was struggled with my arrival in ways she had never resolved. Thomas looked at me, then at our mother, then back at me. "She called you a mistake," he said, not a question. "Yes," I said. "When?" "The first time I was 9, I said. "It wasn't the last." Thomas set down his glass. He did not raise his voice. He was not a loud man. But what he said, quietly, precisely, with the controlled fury of a brother who has just understood something about his sister's childhood that rearranges everything, landed like a verdict. "That was wrong," he said to our mother. "Whatever you were feeling, however complicated it was for you, it was wrong, and I think you owe her something." My mother cried. I had not expected that. She was not a woman who cried easily. Composure was her armor, and she wore it well. But she cried. And in the crying there was something I had not seen from her in 30 years of looking for it. Remorse. Not explanation, not justification, not the version where her feelings were the center of the story. Remorse. "I'm sorry," she said. "I have been sorry for a long time and I didn't know how to say it. I didn't know how to undo what I had done, so I said nothing and let it stay." "It cost me," I said. "I know," she said. "I need you to know how much," I said. "Tell me," she said. And so I did. Standing in the corner of a room full of people celebrating 40 years of a marriage that had produced 2 children, one planned, one wanted differently but wanted nonetheless, I told my mother the truth about what her word had cost me. Every achievement built to compensate, every relationship entered with the assumption that I was too much, every moment of success shadowed by the voice of a 9-year-old in an afternoon kitchen. She listened. All of it, without defense. My mother and I are not fixed. I want to be honest about that. 30 years of something does not dissolve in one evening, however significant. What we are is honest, for the first time. She has begun, slowly, imperfectly, in the way that real change happens, to say things she should have said decades ago. Small things. "I'm proud of you. I see how hard you work. I see you." 3 words that cost her something visible to say, and that I have been waiting 30 years to hear. My father cried when I told him I knew the truth. "I always wanted you," he said. "From the very beginning, I always wanted you." "I know, Dad," I said. "I should have told you sooner," he said. "Yes," I said, "you should have." I am not the mistake my mother's word made me believe I was. I never was. I was a child who arrived into a complicated situation and spent 30 years carrying a description that belonged to the person who gave it, not me, never me. I am my father's wanted daughter. I am my brother's sister, who he looked at across a room and believed without hesitation. I am a woman who stood in the corner of a party and told the truth in front of everyone who mattered. And I am still here, completely, undeniably, unapologetically still here.